wind did not just blow across the high desert of the Arizona Territory. It scraped. It carried the grit of 1,000 miles of sandstone and sage, wearing down anything that stood still long enough to be touched. In the late summer of 1878, the heat shimmered over rock and bone, distorting the horizon until the distant Dragoon Mountains looked like they were melting into the sky. Ethan Cole sat on his horse, a roan gelding with a white blaze that looked like a scar, and watched a hawk circle a thermal draft. He was a man made of the same hard materials as the land. His coat was dusted with the gray powder of the San Pedro River Valley, and his face was a map of lines etched by sun glare and squinting against the unexpected. He rode fence for the Double Bar outfit, a struggling operation that paid in consistent meals and isolation, which was exactly the currency Ethan preferred. He lived half feral in a line shack 10 miles from the main house. It was a wooden box with a tin roof that sang when the hail fell and baked him when the sun was high. His habits were quiet, born of a life he was trying to forget. Every night, before the oil lamp was blown out, Ethan counted his cartridges. He lined them up on the rough table, 45 caliber brass soldiers, and checked the primers. He slept with his boots on, his heels digging into the straw mattress, ready to move before his eyes were fully open. The only time his composure cracked was when the wind shifted from the north, carrying the faint, brassy sound of bugle calls from the fort near the river. At that sound, his shoulders would knot, and his right hand would twitch toward a phantom saber that had not hung at his hip for 3 years. The country was on edge. A ranch kid, the youngest McAllister boy, had gone missing 2 days prior. The rumors spread across the territory faster than a grass fire. Men in town muttered the word Apaches as if it were a curse, as if it were the only story this land knew how to tell. Ethan knew better. He knew that in this country, evil did not belong to one blood or one tribe. It belonged to the heat, and to the men who let the heat burn the humanity out of them. Dusk was settling, turning the shadows in the dry washes into pools of violet ink. When Ethan heard it, it was not the thunder rumbling in the north. It was the sharp, flat crack of a pistol shot, then another. Ethan reined the roan in. The horse danced sideways, sensing the tension in Ethan's legs. The shots had come from a narrow ravine to the west, a place where the water ran fast and dangerous during the monsoon, but stood dry as a bone now. Ethan did not ride toward the sound immediately. He sat, listening, letting the silence rush back in. He heard a shout, distant and thin, and then the sound of brush breaking. He turned the roan and nudged him into a trot. He did not ride like a cowboy. He rode like a scout, keeping to the low ground, his silhouette broken by the mesquite and creosote bushes. When he reached the lip of the ravine, the light was failing. He dismounted and tied the horse to a twisted juniper. Pulling his Winchester from the scabbard, he moved on foot, his boots making no sound on the gravel. The signs of the chase were written clearly on the earth. He saw heavy boot prints, the kind made by men who did not care what they stepped on. He saw dragged brush where someone had fallen and scrambled up again, and on a flat slab of limestone, he saw blood. It was bright red, not yet dried to rust. Ethan moved deeper into the wash. The air here was still and smelled of copper and dry rot. He spotted movement behind a tangle of dead mesquite branches. It was small, a huddled shape that seemed to be trying to merge with the wood. He stepped around the flank of the brush, the rifle held low but ready. There, collapsed in the dirt, was a woman. She was Apache. Her hair was matted with twigs and dust, hanging loose around a face that was gray with exhaustion. She wore a buckskin skirt that had been torn at the hem and a calico shirt that was stained dark at the shoulder. Her right ankle was swollen to the size of a melon, the skin tight and shiny. She held a knife in her hand, but the blade was snapped off halfway down, leaving a jagged shard of steel that she gripped like it was a holy relic. Ethan stopped 5 yards away. He lowered the rifle barrel. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were black, wide with a terror that went beyond the fear of death. It was the fear of what came before death. Her lips were cracked and white from thirst. She tried to stand, scrabbling at the dirt with her free hand, but her leg crumpled under her. A sharp cry escaped her throat, cut off instantly as she bit her lip. Ethan took a step forward, reaching for the canteen slung over his shoulder. The woman recoiled, flinching as if he had raised a whip. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the rough bark of the mesquite. She looked at his face, then at the canteen, and then at the gun. Her breathing was a shallow rattle in her chest. Then she spoke. The words rushed out of her in English, frantic and broken, a rehearsed plea that she must have been reciting in her mind for miles. "Take me on your horse," she begged, her voice shaking so hard the words nearly fractured. "Take me, and I will give you something no woman can give you." The silence that followed was louder than the gunshot had been. Ethan froze. His hand was still on the strap of his canteen. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the way she trembled, not from cold, but from a marrow-deep expectation of violence. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the way she had offered herself up as currency because she believed it was the only language a white man would understand. It was a survival instinct learned from cruelty, a bargain she hated herself for making even as she made it. Ethan felt a cold sickness rise in his gut. He remembered the faces of men he had ridden with, men who spoke of Apache women as things to be used and discarded. He realized she was seeing their faces superimposed over his own. "No," Ethan said. He did not shout. He did not sound angry. His voice was soft, flat, and absolute. The refusal hit her like a physical blow. Her face crumbled in confusion. She tightened her grip on the broken knife, waiting for the trick, waiting for the anger that usually followed a refusal. Ethan crouched down, keeping his movements slow. He uncorked the canteen and extended it, arm fully outstretched, placing it on a flat rock between them. Then he pulled back. "Drink," he said. She stared at the water. Then she lunged for it, dropping the knife to clutch the tin vessel with both hands. She drank with a desperation that was painful to watch, water spilling over her chin and washing away streaks of dust. While she drank, Ethan pulled a bandana from his pocket. He took a folding knife from his belt and sliced the cloth into wide strips. "We have to move," he said. "There are men coming." She lowered the canteen, wiping her mouth with the back of her wrist. She watched him cut the cloth. She did not understand him. Not yet. Ethan holstered his knife and moved toward her. She stiffened, her muscles locking up. But she did not strike out. She was too weak, and the water had bought him a fraction of tolerance. He reached for her injured ankle. "This is going to hurt," he said. He wrapped the cloth tightly, binding the swollen joint to give it support. She made a low sound in her throat, a hiss of pain, but she did not pull away. When he was finished, he stood and offered her a hand. She looked at his palm. It was calloused, scarred, and dirty, but it was open. She hesitated, her eyes searching his face for the lie, finding none. She placed her hand in his. Her fingers were small and cold. Ethan pulled her up. She could not put weight on the foot, so he stooped and swept her up into his arms. She was light, dangerously so, as if she had been running on empty for weeks. Her body was rigid against his chest, holding herself away from him as much as gravity would allow. He carried her out of the wash to where the roan stood waiting. He lifted her into the saddle, adjusting the stirrups quickly. "Hold on to the horn," he ordered. He swung up behind her. The horse shifted under the double weight. Ethan reached around her to take the reins, his arms forming a cage that she shrank away from. He could smell the sage on her skin, and beneath it, the sharp tang of old fear. They rode hard. The sun had vanished behind the mountains, leaving a bruised purple sky in its wake. Ethan pushed the roan, keeping to the rockier ground where tracks would be harder to spot. Behind them, on the ridge line they had just left, 3 silhouettes appeared against the dying light. They were not soldiers. Soldiers rode in columns, uniform and predictable. These men moved like hunters, spread out, scanning the ground. Ethan felt the woman tense. She had seen them too. She turned her head slightly, speaking over her shoulder. Her English was clipped, breathless. "Go left," she said. "Through the cut. The stone is hard there. No sound." Ethan looked at the terrain. To the left was a narrow fissure in the hills, a shadowed throat of rock that looked like a dead end. To the right was the open wash, easier riding but exposed. He hesitated only a second. He turned the horse left. He realized then that she was not just fleeing blindly. She knew this land in a way he never would. She was leading him away from a trap. They entered the cut. The walls rose high on either side, blotting out the last of the light. The horse's hooves clicked softly on the bedrock, the sound swallowed by the stone. It was a dangerous path, steep and slick, but they climbed. Night dropped fast, as it always did in the desert. The temperature plummeted, the heat of the day replaced by a cold that felt like iron settling against the skin. The stars came out, sharp and accusatory. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes began to yip and howl, a sound like maniacal laughter echoing off the canyon walls. They rode until the moon began to rise, painting the landscape in silver and black. Ethan found a shallow arroyo, hidden beneath the overhang of a clay bank. It was not a fortress, but it was cover. He stopped the horse and slid off, then reached up to help her down. She slid into his arms, her legs giving way the moment her feet touched the ground. He lowered her to the sand, propping her against the bank. Ethan moved quickly. He unsaddled the roan and hobbled him, then took his coat and draped it over the horse's head to muffle any sound. He sat close to the animal, forcing his own breathing to slow, his hand resting on the horse's neck to keep him calm. In the shadows, the woman watched him. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, two bright points in the darkness. She watched his hands. They were steady, restrained. She was waiting for the collection of the debt. In her world, the world she had been running through for days, help had a price, and the price was her body. Ethan opened his saddlebag and took out a strip of dried beef. He broke it in half and tossed a piece to her. "Eat," he said. She looked at the meat in the dust. She hesitated, looking at him, then snatched it up. She ate quickly, tearing at the tough jerky with her teeth, eating like she was ashamed of her own hunger. Ethan chewed his own portion slowly, his eyes scanning the rim of the arroyo. Voices carried in the thin night air. Ethan stopped chewing. He held up a hand, signaling silence. Above them, on the flat ground near the canyon edge, horses were walking, the sound of leather creaking, the jingle of a bit chain. "I tell you, she went this way," a voice said. It was a gravelly voice, thick with dust and tobacco. Another voice answered, higher, sharper. "A woman ain't a woman if she's one of them. Frank, she's just a paycheck. $50 from the territory. Maybe more if Mercer wants her back alive for questions." Ethan felt the woman beside him stop breathing. She curled into herself, making herself small, vanishing into the shadow of the bank. "She's hurt," the first voice said. "Saw the blood. She can't have gone far. We'll camp at the rise and cut for sign at first light." The horses moved on, the sounds fading into the vastness of the desert night. In the silence that followed, Ethan heard a soft, hitching sound. He looked at the woman. She was staring at the dirt between her boots. Tears were sliding down her dusty cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the grime. She made no sound. Her mouth was pressed into a tight line. It was a private grief, a pain she had learned to keep silent so it would not draw wolves. Ethan looked away, giving her the dignity of the dark, but his mind was racing. He knew that gravelly voice. It belonged to Frank Miller, a deputy from the town of Benson, a man with a badge and a soul like a dry rot. If a deputy was hunting her, this wasn't just a ranch squabble. A flash of memory hit Ethan, sharp and unbidden. It was 5 years ago, a raid on a village north of the Gila River. There was smoke, so much smoke it tasted like burning hair. There was screaming. He looked down at his own hand in the memory. He was holding a child's bracelet, woven from grass and beads. The owner of the bracelet was gone, lost in the chaos and the fire. He remembered the weight of it. The darkness of that day washed over him, the old guilt that stained his hands no matter how much fence he rode or how far away from the fort he lived. He looked back at the woman. She was shivering now, the adrenaline fading to leave only the cold. Ethan unbuckled his bedroll. He took out his blanket, "A heavy wool issue from the army," and tossed it to her. "Wrap up," he said. She looked at the blanket, then at him. She pulled it around her shoulders, burying her face in the rough wool. They did not speak again that night. Ethan sat with his back to the clay bank, his rifle across his knees, watching the stars wheel overhead. He did not sleep. Dawn came with a brutality that mocked the beauty of the sunrise. The sky turned the color of a bruised peach, and then the sun crested the horizon like a threat, instantly heating the air. "We have to move," Ethan said, kicking dirt over the small hole he had dug for a latrine. The woman struggled to stand. Her face was flushed, her eyes glassy. The fever had set in during the night. The graze on her shoulder was angry and red, and her ankle was stiff. Ethan helped her onto the horse. She was heavier now, dead weight, her energy sapped by the infection. They crossed open flats where the ground was cracked into puzzle pieces of dried mud. Vultures circled high above, patient black kites waiting for the inevitable. By mid-morning, the woman was swaying in the saddle. She muttered in her own language, words that sounded like water flowing over stones. Ethan scanned the horizon. He knew a place, a seep at the base of a rock formation 5 miles north. It was a gamble, but they needed water. When they reached the spot, it was nothing but a patch of damp mud surrounded by bees. Ethan dismounted and used a flat stone to dig. He dug for 20 minutes, sweat stinging his eyes, until a small pool of brown water gathered at the bottom of the hole. He filtered it through his handkerchief into the canteen. He held it to the woman's lips. She drank, then grabbed his sleeve. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into his forearm. "Taza," she whispered. Her eyes were unfocused, looking through him. "We have to find Taza." She clutched his sleeve like it was the only solid thing in a world that was dissolving. Ethan looked at her. "Taza, it was a name. Your son," he asked quietly. She did not answer, her head lolling back against his chest. Ethan's face hardened. He assumed it was her child, a woman running this hard, begging this desperate. It had to be for a child. A cold dread settled in his chest. If the boy was with the men hunting her, or lost in the desert. He capped the canteen. He climbed back into the saddle, settling her against him. He had a purpose now. It wasn't just about saving a woman. It was about the child. "Look for the rocks," he told the horse, though the animal was just following the pressure of his knees. They reached a rocky outcrop as the afternoon sky began to bruise with dark clouds. The heat had built a storm, a violent monsoon cell that was towering over the mountains to the south. Ethan found a series of shallow caves near the top of the outcrop. They were little more than scoops in the sandstone, but they offered shelter from the wind and the coming rain. He carried her into the deepest cave. It smelled of bat guano and old dust. He went back out to gather armfuls of dry creosote and greasewood before the rain hit. He built a small fire deep in the back of the cave, where the smoke would be trapped against the ceiling and dissipate slowly rather than billowing out to signal their location. The warmth of the fire seemed to bring her back from the edge of delirium. She sat up, the blanket wrapped tight around her. She watched him feed sticks to the flames. "Why?" she asked. Ethan looked up. "Why what? Why do you help? You are white. You are them." Ethan broke a stick in his hands. It snapped with a sharp report. "I'm not them," he said. "Not anymore." She studied him. The firelight flickered in her eyes. "They killed my uncle," she said. Her voice was flat, reciting facts. He was the last one who could fight. He refused to sell the water rights to the man from the mine. They shot him in the back while he was fixing a wagon wheel. She looked at the fire. "Then they came for me." Ethan poked at the coals. "I know men like that." He said, "Are you a good man?" she asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and simple. Ethan looked at her. He thought of the raid. He thought of the years of silence, the drinking, the running away from his own name. "No," he said, "I'm not a good man." He met her gaze. "But I won't hand you over." His honesty unsettled her more than a lie would have. A lie she could have fought. The truth left her with nothing to push against. Outside, the sky tore open. The rain didn't start. It arrived. It slammed into the earth with the force of a stampede. Thunder shook the ground, vibrating through the stone floor of the cave. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The dry washes below would be raging torrents within the hour. The escape routes were gone. The land had turned to slick clay and drowning water. They were trapped here. The cave was small. The fire was small. They had to move closer to the heat and to each other. Ethan sat next to her, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her fevered skin. He draped his canvas coat over her shoulders on top of the blanket. She was trembling again, but the shaking was slowly easing as the warmth penetrated. The sound of the rain was a deafening roar, a curtain of gray noise that cut them off from the rest of the world. They sat in the semi-darkness, breathing the same air. She drifted into sleep, her head bowing forward. Ethan watched the entrance, his rifle across his lap. Suddenly, she gasped. Her body jerked, and her hand shot out, grabbing Ethan's wrist. Her fingers clamped down hard, her nails digging into his skin. She was staring at the wall of the cave, eyes wide but seeing something else, a memory, a nightmare. Ethan did not pull away. He did not shake her off. He sat perfectly still, letting his arm be the anchor she needed. He waited, slowly. The tension left her arm. Her breathing slowed. She blinked, and the nightmare receded, replaced by the flickering firelight and the bearded man sitting beside her. She looked at her hand gripping his wrist. She looked at his face. He wasn't looking at her with hunger. He wasn't looking at her with hate. He was just there. She loosened her grip, but she did not let go completely. Outside, the storm raged, tearing at the desert, washing away tracks and scents. But inside the cave, in the small circle of orange light, there was a fragile quiet. For the first time since she had started running, Naylin realized she was not prey, at least, not while she was with him. The morning sun broke the back of the storm with a violence typical of the territory. For 1 hour, the desert smelled unlike itself, clean, sharp with the scent of wet sage and ozone. The dust hammered down into a dense copper paste. The air was cool enough to breathe without tasting grit. But by mid-morning, the moisture had evaporated, rising in shimmering waves that distorted the distance. And the land returned to what it had always been: hard light, gray rock, and a silence so profound it felt like pressure against the eardrums. Ethan Cole stood outside the shallow cave, watching the horizon. The storm had washed away their tracks, resetting the game, but it had also softened the ground, making new prints dangerously easy to read. He turned back to where Naylin sat. She was unwrapping the cloth from her ankle. The swelling had worsened overnight, the skin tight and bruised a deep purple. But when Ethan knelt to examine the joint, he found the bone sound. "It will hold," he said, his voice rough with morning disuse. "But you cannot walk on it, not far." Naylin looked at the swollen flesh, then at the horse grazing on a patch of galeta grass nearby. She nodded once. She did not complain. In the light of day, stripped of the immediate terror of the chase, her face held a stoic resolve that made her look older than she was. They rode out before the sun reached its zenith. Ethan walked, leading the roan, while Naylin sat in the saddle, her injured leg dangling free of the stirrup. They avoided the established trails, those ribbon-thin scars in the earth where wagons and riders had packed the dirt hard. Instead, Ethan guided them through the rough country, sticking to the spines of ridges where the ground was stony and left little sign, or navigating the edges of dry creek beds where the palo verde trees grew thick and low. Naylin watched him. She watched the way his head moved constantly, scanning the back trail, the skyline, the shadows of the rocks. He did not just look. He dissected the landscape. A hawk taking flight too suddenly, a shift in the wind, a silence where insects should be buzzing. He weighed it all. She realized then that this man did not just fear the men chasing her. He expected betrayal from the world itself. He moved like a creature that had been hunted for a long time, or perhaps like a creature that had done things that made him unworthy of safety. It was a language she understood. Over the next 2 days, A quiet education passed between them. It started with necessity. Ethan stopped the horse at the edge of a blind rise. He turned to her and raised a flat hand, palm down. "Stop," he said. He signaled again, hand pushing toward the earth. "Get down, low." He did not speak to her as if she were a child or a savage. He spoke to her as he would a green trooper who needed to learn the drill to stay alive. There was a respect in his brevity. He expected her to understand, and because he expected it, she did. By the second afternoon, the roles reversed. They had stopped to rest the horse in the shade of a mesquite thicket. Their water was low, and the jerky was gone. Nalin pointed to a cluster of prickly pear cactus, the pads thick with oval fruits that were turning a deep magenta. Ethan reached for his knife, intending to slice one off. "No," Nalin said. She moved faster than her injury should have allowed, catching his wrist. "Not that way. The hair, the spines." "They stay in the tongue." She picked up a dry stick and showed him how to roll the fruit in the dirt first, rubbing off the near-invisible glochids that would torment a man for days. Then she used the knife, slicing the skin with surgical precision to reveal the bright red, sweet flesh inside. She handed it to him. Ethan took it. The fruit tasted of rain and sugar. He looked at her, and for the first time, the tension in his jaw loosened. Later, when the wind shifted, blowing from the west, Nalin flared her nostrils. She pointed upwind. "Horses," she said, "not near, but on the wind." Ethan sniffed the air. He smelled only dust and resin. He looked at her, skeptical. "Sweat," she clarified. "Old sweat. Leather." He trusted her. They altered their course, moving deeper into a canyon to let the scent pass them by. Hours later, he saw the faint dust cloud of riders moving parallel to their previous path, miles away. He looked at her with a new expression, not just pity, but recognition. She was a survivor, same as him. Their communication stripped itself down to the essentials. Short English phrases from her, simple, direct words from him. The silence between them ceased to be an empty thing and became a shared weight, a way of being together without the exhaustion of explaining who they were. On the third day, the landscape began to change. The isolation of the high desert gave way to signs of encroachment. They saw fence lines, cut wire shimmering in the heat. They saw cattle branding fires in the distance. They neared a small settlement, little more than a collection of adobe structures and timber framing clinging to the edge of a mining road. Ethan stopped the horse a mile out, hidden in a grove of cottonwoods. "I need supplies," he said, checking the loads in his revolver. "Coffee, flour, bullets." Nalin smelled the wood smoke drifting from the chimneys. She heard the distant bark of a dog. Her body went rigid. To her, a town was not a place of commerce. It was a cage. It was a place where walls blocked the sight of escape, and where men gathered to drink and hate. "You stay here," Ethan said, seeing her fear. "I will come back." He started to turn away, but then he stopped. He looked back at her. "Or you come." He did not order her to stay. He did not force her to come. He laid the choice out like a weapon on a table and let her decide which end to pick. Nalin looked at the dark grove of trees. She looked at the distant town. She was tired of hiding in the dirt like a lizard. She was tired of the silence being her only defense. "I come," she said. Ethan nodded. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a spare shirt, gray flannel, worn thin at the elbows, and a battered, wide-brimmed hat that he kept for bad weather. "Put these on," he said. "Keep your head down." She pulled the shirt over her buckskin dress. It smelled of him, gun oil, tobacco, and sweat. She jammed the hat onto her head, pulling the brim low to shadow her face. She looked small inside the clothes, but she sat straighter in the saddle. They rode into the settlement at a walk. The town was called Black Rock, a name as unimaginative as the architecture. A single main street churned into mud and dried into ruts ran between a general store, a saloon, a livery, and a scatter of houses. People stared. In a place this small, strangers were events. A woman sweeping a porch stopped and leaned on her broom. her eyes narrowing as she took in Ethan's unkempt beard and the small figure bundled in oversized clothes on the horse. Ethan tied the roan to the rail outside the general store. He reached up and helped Nellen down. She leaned heavily on him, limping toward the boardwalk. Inside, the store was dim and smelled of pickle brine and sawdust. The shopkeeper, a man with a heavy mustache and an apron stained with tallow, looked up from the counter. He smiled at Ethan, a professional, weary smile, until his eyes slid to Nellen. She had lifted her head slightly to look at a jar of hard candy. The light from the window caught her cheekbones, the copper tone of her skin, the undeniable shape of her eyes. The shopkeeper's smile vanished like a flame pinched out. "I don't serve Indians," he said. His voice was flat. Ethan stopped halfway to the flour barrel. He turned slowly. "She's with me," Ethan said. "I don't care if she's with the President of the United States," the shopkeeper said, crossing his arms. "No trade with Apaches. Get her out." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Nellen shrank back, the hat brim dipping to hide her face again. The humiliation was not a sharp pain. It was a dull, heavy slap that she couldn't block. It was the feeling of being reduced to something less than human, something that could be dismissed with a word. Ethan walked to the counter. He placed both hands on the wood. "I want 10 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of coffee, and a box of 45 cartridges," he said. "And I am paying cash." The shopkeeper hesitated, looking at Ethan's eyes. There was violence there, a coiled, dangerous heat. "Take your goods," the man muttered, looking away. "But be quick about it." Ethan bought the supplies. His jaw set so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He did not look at Nellen. He did not want to see the shame he knew was burning her face. They walked out into the bright sun. A small crowd had gathered. A man in a black frock coat, a preacher, by the look of the Bible clutched in his hand like a brick, stood in the center of the street. He pointed a shaking finger at Nellen. "A test," he shouted. "A test and a curse. The heathens are among us, bringing their wickedness into the light." The people around him murmured. They fed on the cruelty. It gave them a target for their own miseries, the heat, the poverty, the fear of the vast emptiness surrounding them. Ethan dropped the supplies. His hand went to the grip of his pistol. The rage that had been simmering in him for years, the anger at the unfairness of the world, flared white-hot. He took a step toward the preacher. Nellen reached out. Her hand, small and trembling, touched his arm. It was a light touch, but it stopped him cold. "No," she whispered. "Not here." Her voice was urgent. She knew how this ended. If he drew his gun, they would both die in the dirt of this miserable street. Ethan looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also the wisdom. He exhaled, a ragged sound. He picked up the sacks of flour and coffee, threw them over the saddle horn, and helped Nellen up. As they turned the horse to leave, Ethan glanced at the porch of the saloon. Sitting in a chair, tilted back against the wall, was a man smoking a cigarillo. He wore a badge that caught the sun. It was the deputy, the one from the posse. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. He took the cigarillo from his mouth and smiled, a small, knowing expression that chilled Ethan's blood more than the preacher's shouting. They rode out of town without looking back. That night, they camped miles away, in the shelter of a dry wash. Ethan made a small fire, the flames licking at the darkness. Nellen sat on her blanket, staring at the fire. She had taken off the oversized hat and shirt. She looked fragile again. Suddenly, she made a sound, a choked, angry sob. She hit her own leg with a closed fist. "I said it," she whispered. Ethan looked up from his coffee. "Said what?" "The words," she said, turning her face to him. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was fierce with self-loathing. "When you found me, I said I would give you what no woman can give." She spat the words out like poison. "I said it because I am weak, because I thought that is all I am. That is all men want." Ethan set his cup down. He watched her. The shame was eating her alive. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because she felt she had betrayed her own soul to survive. He waited until she looked at him. "I heard you," he said softly. "I hated myself." She said, "I hate that I know those words." Ethan leaned forward. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face. "I was a scout," he said. The confession hung in the air. Naylin went still. "For 3 years, I rode with the army." Ethan continued. "I tracked for them. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself I was stopping the killing by ending fights quickly." He looked at his hands. "But I led them to villages. I led them to places where women and children were sleeping. I watched what happened, and I didn't stop it. I couldn't stop it." He looked up at her, his eyes raw. "I tried to wash it off. I came out here, lived in a shack, tried to be nothing. But the blood doesn't wash off." Naylin stared at him. She saw the ghost that haunted him. She saw the reason he slept with his boots on and flinched at bugle calls. He was a man who had participated in the destruction of her world, and now he was saving her life. She should have hated him. By all the laws of her people, she should have taken his knife and cut his throat while he slept. But she looked at his face, stripped of all defenses. "You stopped," she said. Ethan blinked. "You are not doing it now," she said. "You stopped?" It was a small distinction. It was not forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement that a man was not fixed in stone. He could change direction. Ethan let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 3 years. They slept apart, but the distance between them felt shorter. The next evening, they found shelter in a grove of cottonwoods near the San Pedro River. The water was low, moving sluggishly over sandbars, but the moonlight turning the surface into hammered silver made the world feel briefly soft. They washed the dust from their faces. Naylin sat on a fallen log, unwinding the bandage from her ankle. Ethan sat nearby, cleaning his rifle. He hissed in pain as the gun oil stung a cut on the back of his hand, a jagged scrape he had gotten from the saddle leather. "Let me see," Naylin said. She moved to him. She took his hand in hers. Her fingers were cool and rough-skinned, but her touch was incredibly gentle. She examined the cut, then dipped a piece of cloth in the river water and dabbed it clean. Her fingers lingered on his skin. She traced the line of a scar across his knuckles. Ethan stopped breathing. The scent of her, river water, smoke, and sage, filled his head. He looked at her face, inches from his own. Her lips were parted slightly. The air between them charged with a sudden, electric heat. It was the ache of wanting, the sheer biological pull of two people who had been surviving on adrenaline and fear. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to lean in. He wanted to bury his face in her hair and forget the desert, the posse, the past. But then he pulled his hand away. He pulled back as if she had burned him. Naylin did not move away. She looked at him, her eyes dark and searching. "You want," she said. It was not a question. "You fear." Ethan looked at the river. "I do," he admitted. "Why?" she asked. "You are strong." "Because I break things," Ethan said, his voice low. "I don't know how to be gentle. Naylin, I haven't been gentle since before the war. I don't trust myself with something I need." Naylin looked at him for a long moment. She understood that fear. It was the fear that the violence of the world had become part of his bones. "We have one blanket," she said. It was a simple fact. The night was cold. Ethan laid the blanket out. They lay down together, side by side. He did not touch her. She did not touch him. But the heat of their bodies bridged the inch of space between them. The closeness was agonizing and comforting all at once. They held the boundary, learning that trust wasn't about taking. It was about being close enough to hurt, and choosing not to. The next day, as they rode through a canyon of red rock, Naylin broke the silence. "Taza is not my son," she said. Ethan turned in the saddle. "He is my brother," she said. "He is 12 winters." Ethan felt a shift in his chest. A brother. "The men who took him, they are not soldiers," Naylin said. "They are traders. They take children. They take women. They sell them to the mines in the south or to houses in the cities. They call them servants on the paper. So the law does not look." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles turned white. He knew about these rings. It was slavery by another name, hidden behind indentured contracts and corrupt officials. "We will find him," Ethan said. It was a promise. Promises were dangerous things in this territory. They got you killed. But he said it anyway. "Who runs it?" Ethan asked. "Mercer," she said. The name came out like a curse. Silas Mercer. Ethan felt a chill. Silas Mercer was not just a man. He was a power. He owned the Copper Queen mine. He owned the freight lines. He owned half the county's lawmen, likely including the deputy who was hunting them. "He offered protection to my uncle," Nayland said, "in exchange for passage through our land to the water. When my uncle said no, the protection became a sword. They were riding toward the devil himself. 2 days later, they skirted the edge of a mining town called Bisbee. They kept to the high ridges, looking down at the scars the mines had cut into the earth. On the outskirts of the town, near a cluster of stunted oaks, they saw it. A body was hanging from a branch. It swayed slowly in the wind. Ethan brought the spyglass to his eye. It was an Apache man. A sign was nailed to the trunk of the tree. "Raider." Nayland made a sound that was half gasp, half snarl. "He was not a raider," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Look at his clothes. He was a farmer. He has clay on his trousers." Ethan lowered the glass. He understood the game now. The county used the fear of Apache raiders to cover everything. If cattle were stolen by white rustlers, blame the Apaches. If a man was murdered for his claim, blame the Apaches. If Mercer wanted to seize land with water rights, he claimed he was clearing out a hostile threat. It was a machine of lies, lubricated with blood. "We have to go," Ethan said. "We are too close," but it was too late. A shout echoed from the valley floor. Ethan looked down. 3 riders were scrambling up the slope, their horses kicking up dust. Mercer's men. They had been spotted. "Ride!" Ethan shouted. He spurred the roan. The horse lunged forward, scrambling over loose shale. They dove into a narrow ravine, the walls rising up to shield them. Above them, on the rim, the hooves of the pursuers clattered on the stone. Ethan pulled the roan to a halt under a ledge. He slid off and pulled Nayland down. He clamped a hand over the horse's nostrils. They pressed themselves against the rock wall. It was dark in the ravine, the shadows deep and cold. The riders paused right above them. Dust drifted down, coating their shoulders. "I lost them," a voice cursed. "Keep riding south. They have to come out at the pass." The hooves thundered away. In the silence that followed, Nayland was pressed hard against Ethan. Her chest heaved against his. He could feel her heart hammering, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. His hands were hovering near her waist, trembling. He wanted to hold her, to shield her, but he was afraid to cross the line. He was enduring the want, letting it burn him. Nayland looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, dark pools in the shadow. She saw the restraint in his face. She saw that he would rather die than take something she did not give. She reached up. She grabbed the lapels of his coat and pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It was fierce. It was angry. It tasted of dust and adrenaline and the desperate need to prove that she was still alive, that she was a woman and not just a hunted animal. Her mouth crushed against his, demanding a response. Ethan froze for a second. Then his arms went around her, pulling her close. He kissed her back, pouring all the fear and the unspoken promises into the contact. Then she pulled back. She was breathless, shaken by her own need. She looked at him, eyes searching for regret. Ethan did not chase her. He did not try to pull her back in. He stepped forward slowly and touched his forehead to hers. He closed his eyes. "I am here," he whispered. It was a vow without words. It was a promise that he was not going anywhere, that he was hers to command, hers to trust. Nayland let out a long, shuddering breath. She leaned into him, accepting the support. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of crimson and orange. Ethan checked his rifle. He looked south, toward the darkening mountains where the lights of Mercer's mines would soon begin to twinkle like false stars. "To find Taza, we have to go there," Ethan said. "To Mercer's land." Naylin nodded. She touched the knife at her belt. "Then we go," she said. They mounted the horse together. They turned south, riding toward the territory where truth was a stranger and violence was the only law, ready to burn it all down if they had to. The land changed as they pushed south, shedding the high desert scrub for a country that looked as if it had been skinned alive. The earth turned the color of dried blood, a jagged expanse of red rock and sandstone spires that clawed at the belly of the sky. Everything here grew thorns. The ocotillo raised skeletal arms tipped with crimson flowers like fresh wounds, and the cholla waited for a careless brush of a sleeve to detach its barbed joints into flesh. It was long, empty country where a wrong turn meant death by exposure. Ethan Cole and Ellen trailed a supply wagon route that cut through the Badlands, staying miles back, ghosts haunting the periphery of commerce. They used deep ravines and the shadows of mesas for cover, moving only when the heat of the day began to bleed out into the violet dusk. On the fourth day in the Red Rocks, they found them. It was not a war party. It was a huddled group of 6 Apaches tucked into a wind-scoured undercut of a canyon wall. They looked less like warriors and more like drift tangled in a river snag. Their ribs showed through their skin, and their eyes held the flat, glassy look of starvation. Ethan reined in the roan, his hand instinctively going to the Winchester scabbard. Nyland signaled him to wait and slid from the saddle, walking forward with her hands open. She spoke a greeting, her voice soft against the stone. An older man, his hair gray and matted, stood up. He recognized her. Ethan saw the flicker of recognition in the old man's eyes, but it was not followed by relief. It was followed by fear. They spoke in their own tongue, a rapid exchange that grew tense. Naylin gestured to the north, then to Ethan. The old man shook his head violently, pointing toward the mountains, then making a cutting motion across his throat. Naylin stepped back, her shoulders slumping. She returned to the horse, her face set in a mask of hard discipline. "They will not help," she said, climbing back up behind Ethan. "They say I am marked. The soldiers are not just looking for a woman anymore. They are hunting a story. If they are found with me, they will all die." Ethan looked at the huddled group. He saw a mother pressing a hand over a crying infant's mouth to silence it. "I can leave," Ethan said. He meant it. If he was the danger, he would ride away. Naylin gripped his waist. Her fingers dug into his coat. "No," she said. "It would be safer for them," Ethan said. "And for you." "Safe?" she asked, the word sharp. "There is no safe. There is only alive or dead. I am done sacrificing myself to make other people comfortable with their fear. We ride." They left the group behind, a pocket of misery in the vast silence. Nalin did not look back. She had learned a brutal lesson in that canyon. She was isolated from both worlds now. To the whites, she was a savage. To her own people, she was a lightning rod calling down the storm. 2 days later, near the settlement of Tubac, they found the woman the drifters had whispered about. Her name was Maria Lujan. She lived in an adobe structure that leaned precariously against a hillside, part house, part root cellar. She was a woman of mixed blood, her face a roadmap of 3 different cultures, none of which claimed her. She made her living as a translator, a midwife, and a medic for those who could not walk through the front door of a doctor's office. She did not ask for their names. She simply pointed to a stool and told Nalin to sit. Maria unwrapped the dirty cloth from Nalin's ankle. She hissed through her teeth. The swelling had gone down, but the bruising was deep, the ligaments strained to their limit. "You have been riding hard on a bad joint," Maria said, slathering a pungent green paste onto the skin. "It will heal, but it will remember this injury when it rains." She looked at Ethan, who was standing by the door, watching the road. "You are the ones they are talking about in the saloons," she said. "The scout and the girl?" Ethan did not answer. "Silas Mercer pays for quiet removals," Maria said, wiping her hands on her apron. She spoke the truth as if she were discussing the weather. He has a business model. He needs labor for the mines, and he needs the water rights to the valley. When he takes the land, the men disappear into shallow graves. The women and children, they disappear onto paper. Paper? Ethan asked. Indentured contracts, Maria explained. Labor apprenticeships. It is legal. If the judge is paid enough, they sign a paper saying the child is an orphan and awarded the territory. And then they assign the guardianship to Mercer's operations. It is slavery with a government stamp. She looked at Nolan. You're looking for a boy? Nolan nodded. Taza. Maria stood up and went to a heavy wooden chest. She pulled out a map, hand drawn on hide. Mercer funds the San Xavier mission outpost, 20 miles south. The priest there is a man named Father Grijalva. He is not a bad man, but he is a frightened one. He keeps the records. If your boy's in the system, his name is in the book at that mission. They rode at night. The mission was a pale ghost in the moonlight, white adobe walls glowing softly against the dark scrub. The bell tower stood silent. Ethan left Nylan with the horse in the cover of the mesquite and approached the heavy oak door. He did not knock. He used his knife to lift the latch. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax and old incense. Father Grijalva was awake, sitting at a desk with a single candle. When he saw Ethan, dusty, armed, and silent, he did not scream. He closed his eyes and crossed himself. I have no money, the priest said. I don't want money, Ethan said. I want the book. The priest hesitated. He looked at the heavy ledger on his desk. Mercer gives us donations. The priest whispered, we feed orphans with that money. If you stop, you starve. Ethan finished. But if you keep going, you sell them. He signaled to the door. Nayland stepped out of the shadows. She limped into the light. The priest looked at her, and his shame seemed to collapse him from the inside. He pushed the book across the desk. Nayland opened it. Her finger traced the columns of ink. Names, dates, disposition. It was a catalog of human lives reduced to inventory. She stopped. Her finger trembled. Here, she said. The entry was dated 2 weeks prior. Male, approx. 12 years. Apache, renamed. Thomas, assigned to Copper Queen Mine, Sorting Shed 4. He is not dead, Nolan whispered. But he is not Taza anymore. He is Thomas. Paper chains, Ethan thought. Harder to break than iron ones. They left the mission before the sun rose, as they rode toward the mining district. Ethan's mind began to construct a plan. It was the kind of plan he used to make for the army. Cold, calculated, and reliant on timing. We need to know the shift changes, Ethan said as they camped in a dry wash the next day. We need to know where the guards drink and who boasts about the security. I will go in. I will look like a drifter looking for work. I go too, Nayland said. No, Ethan said. It is too dangerous. If they see you, you are just a man, Nayland said. But you do not know Taza. You do not know the whistle we used when we were children. If he hears it, he will know to run. If you just grab him, he will fight. He bites. Ethan looked at her. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to wrap her in cotton and hide her away until the world stopped being sharp. But he looked at the set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. She was not a package to be delivered. She was a warrior in her own right. He nodded. We go together. That evening, the air grew still. They were camped in a deep canyon where the wind hit the fluted rocks and created a low, humming vibration, a song that seemed to come from the earth itself. Ethan sat by Nayland. He had cut a strip of rawhide from his saddle strings. He took her foot in his lap. This will support the ankle better than cloth, he said. He began to braid the wet leather around her boot and ankle, pulling it tight so it would dry into a rigid brace. His hands were rough, scarred from barbed wire and bridle reins, but his touch was incredibly precise. Nayland watched him. She taught him the Apache word for water. Tu, she taught him the word for shelter. Gawa, she taught him the word for danger. Naguns go. He repeated the words, his accent clumsy but earnest. My mother, Nayland said softly, looking at the canyon walls. She used to sing to the wind. She said the wind was the breath of the ancestors. When she died, when the soldiers came, she did not scream, she sang. Ethan finished the knot. He did not let go of her foot. "I'm afraid," he admitted. His voice was low, barely audible over the singing wind. "Afraid of the mine?" Nayland asked. "Afraid I will get you killed," Ethan said. "I have led people into bad places before. Nayland, I have watched them die because I made a wrong choice." Nayland leaned forward. She placed her hand on his cheek. Her palm was warm. "I already died once," she said, "the day they took my family. The day I ran, I was dead inside until you gave me water." She looked into his eyes, and the distance between them vanished. "You cannot kill a ghost, Ethan," she whispered, "but you can make her want to live again." The air between them changed. It wasn't the frantic desperation of their first kiss in the ravine. It was heavier, deeper. It was a gravity they could no longer resist. Ethan turned his face into her palm. He kissed her wrist, right over the pulse point. Nayland made a soft sound and moved into him. They did not scramble. They did not tear at each other. They came together with a terrifying slowness, hands mapping the other's face, shoulders, back. When he kissed her, it was a question. When she kissed him back, it was the answer. They lay back on the blanket. The wind sang above them. There was trembling, his hands, her breath. But it was not from fear. It was the sheer magnitude of letting someone in when you had spent years building walls. It was not explicit, not a performance. It was a desperate human clinging, a mutual choice to be warm in a cold world, to be seen in the dark. When the morning came, the light did not bring shame. It brought terror. Ethan woke and looked at Nayland sleeping beside him. He felt a cold pit in his stomach. Before, if he died, he was just ending a long, tired mistake. Now, if he died, he left her alone. Now, if she died, he would be destroyed in a way that whiskey could never fix. They were not fixed. They were more afraid, because now they had everything to lose. They reached the outskirts of Mercer's town 2 days later. It was a scar on the land. Smokestacks belching sulphurous yellow smoke. The constant thud of stamp mills crushing rock. The smell of unwashed bodies and coal dust. Ethan left the horse with Maria, who had followed them at a distance to offer support. He rubbed dirt into his face, darkened his beard with grease, and walked into the camp with his hat pulled low. Nayland stayed hidden in the scrub brush on the ridge, watching through Ethan's spyglass. Ethan moved through the camp. It was a place of cruelty dressed as business. He saw men with hollow eyes trudging toward the shafts. He saw guards with shotguns patrolling the perimeter like prison wardens. He sat near the company store, whittling a stick, making himself invisible. He watched a foreman, a big man with a red beard, strike a worker across the face with a quirt. "Thief!" the foreman shouted. The worker, a Mexican laborer, fell to his knees, blood pouring from his nose. "I took nothing," he cried. The foreman kicked him in the ribs. "You stole time. Get back to the line. No trial, no questions." Justice here was whoever held the whip. Later, Ethan drifted near the loading docks. He overheard the foreman talking to a wagon driver. "Shipment goes out Thursday," the foreman said, lighting a pipe. "Got a mixed load. Copper ingots and the new batch of apprentices." The driver laughed. "The little ones?" "Yeah, including that one boy who bites, the little savage. Mercer wants him moved to the smelter. Says he's too much trouble for the sorting shed." Ethan's blood ran cold. The smelter was a death sentence for a child. The fumes alone killed men in a year. He slipped away and returned to the ridge. He drew a map in the dirt for Nayland. "Sorting shed 4. He said, "It's here, near the rail line. They move them at shift change. When the whistle blows at 6, that's the chaos we need." He hesitated. "The sheriff is down there," Ethan said. "I saw his horse. And the deputy. They aren't just ignoring this. Nayland, they are guarding it." Nayland's face went icy calm. She looked at the town below. "The law is not broken," she said. "It is working exactly as they designed it. The plan was simple: violence and speed." At 6 o'clock, the steam whistle shrieked. The ground rumbled as the shift changed. Hundreds of men poured out of the shafts, and hundreds more marched in. Ethan and Allen moved through the shadows of the machinery yard. Nayland moved like smoke, silent and fluid. Ethan moved with the predatory grace of a scout. They reached Sorting Shed 4. It was a long wooden structure with high windows. Ethan tried the door. Locked. He used a pry bar to snap the hasp. They slipped inside. The shed was full of ore bins. In the back, there was a caged area. Empty. Ethan cursed. He scanned the room. On a wooden support beam near the cage, he saw something. Fresh marks carved into the wood. He shone his lantern. It was a symbol. A jagged mountain line. He was here, Nolan whispered, touching the wood. This is Taza's mark. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Voices. They're early, Ethan hissed. The door swung open. 2 guards stepped in, lanterns held high. Hey, one shouted. Who's in there? Ethan didn't hesitate. He shoulder-checked the first guard, sending him sprawling into an ore bin. The lantern shattered, flames licking at the dry wood. The second guard raised a shotgun. Nayland threw a rock, a heavy piece of ore she had picked up. It struck the guard in the temple. His aim went wide, the shotgun blasting a hole in the roof. The first guard scrambled up. Drawing a knife, Ethan grappled with him. It was a messy, desperate struggle in the dark. The guard was strong, smelling of whiskey and sweat. He slashed at Ethan's face. Ethan blocked, twisting the man's arm. There was a sickening snap. The guard cried out, falling back. He hit his head on the iron corner of the ore cart. A sharp crack echoed. The guard stopped moving. Ethan stood up, chest heaving. He looked at the man. Dead. The alarm bell began to ring outside. The gunshot had drawn the hive. We have to go. Nayland pulled at his arm. They bolted out the back, scrambling up a scree slope as bullets kicked up dust around their feet. They vanished into the dark, leaving a dead white man behind them. The stakes had changed. Before, they were helping a runaway. Now, they were murderers. By morning, the posters were already up. Wanted, Ethan Cole, an Apache accomplice. Murder, reward $1,000. The town prejudice ignited like dry tinder. It wasn't just a hunt for a criminal anymore. It was a crusade. Men who had never held a gun before were strapping on holsters, eager for the money and the permission to hate. They hid in Maria's cellar. Maria came down the ladder, her face pale. You cannot stay, she said. The sheriff has deputized 20 men. Mercer has sent word to the fort. They are saying you are a renegade scout leading an uprising. The courts? Ethan asked, pacing the small room. If I turn myself in, explain about the boy. The courts? Maria laughed bitterly. The judge plays poker with Mercer on Tuesdays. If you turn yourself in, you will hang before the sun sets. And the girl, she will disappear. Ethan looked at Nayland. She was sharpening her knife. I will not let them take me, she said. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He looked at the map. We can't run, he said. They have the telegraph. They have the horses. If we run, they catch us in the open. We fight? Nolan asked. No, Ethan said. We prove it. He turned to Maria. You said the sheriff covers it up. He has records? Maria nodded. He keeps a ledger. In his office. He logs the fees he gets from Mercer for every batch of laborers. It lists the names, the payments, the dates. If we have that book, Ethan said, we have a federal case. We have proof of slavery. The territory courts might be bought, but a U.S. Marshal, it is suicide. Maria said, the office is in the center of town. It is the only way. Nayland said, that night, the town was loud. The saloons were full of men bragging about how they would spend the reward money. Nayland moved across the rooftops. She was lighter than Ethan, quieter. The plan was for her to enter the sheriff's office through the skylight while Ethan created a distraction at the livery stable down the street. She slipped through the open skylight, dropping silently onto the floor of the office. It smelled of stale cigar smoke and gun oil. A single kerosene lamp burned low on the desk. She moved to the safe. It was open. Arrogance. Why lock the safe when you own the law? She pulled out a thick leather book. She opened it. Her hands shook. November 12th. Payment from Mercer, $500. Transport of 6 females, 2 males. Names: Sarah, Little Bird, Thomas. It was all there. The sale of human beings listed like cattle. She tucked the ledger into her shirt. She turned to the door. Click. The sound of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver. Naylin froze. She looked toward the corner of the room, where the shadows were deep. A match flared. The flame illuminated a face. It was the deputy, Frank Miller, the man from the first chase. He was sitting in the corner, smiling. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had baited a trap and watched the mouse walk right in. "Hello, sweetheart," the deputy said, outside, on the street. Ethan was striking a match to light the hay in the livery stable. He paused. A shout rang out from the sheriff's office. "I got her!" The voice cut through the night. Ethan's heart stopped. He looked at the burning match in his hand, then at the sheriff's office down the street. The trap had snapped shut. Naylin was inside, in the lamplight, and the wolves were at the door. The sound of the deputy's revolver was not a bang. In the confines of the small office, it was a thunderclap that shattered the world. The bullet bit into the door frame inches from Naylin's head, sending splinters of pine stinging into her cheek. She did not freeze. She did not scream. Naylin reacted with the fluid, desperate speed of a creature that had been anticipating the trap. She threw herself sideways, not toward the door where the deputy stood blocking the exit, but toward the side window. She struck the glass with her shoulder. Tucking her head, the pane exploded outward. Naylin tumbled into the alleyway. The ledger clutched tight against her ribs, landing hard on the packed dirt. Shards of glass sliced her arm, but the adrenaline flooded her veins so hotly she felt nothing. Behind her, the deputy shouted, his voice cracking with rage. Another shot rang out, blowing out the rest of the window frame, but Naylin was already scrambling to her feet. The town woke like a beast smelling blood. Doors slammed open. Men spilled out of the saloons, confused but eager for violence. The shout of Apache went up, a singular word that turned the confusion into a focused, lethal intent. Ethan saw the glass fly. He was standing by the livery stable, a match burning down to his fingertips. He did not hesitate. He flicked the match into the pile of dry straw he had kicked against the stable wall. The oil-soaked hay caught with a whoosh, a sheet of orange flame climbing the timber in seconds. "Fire!" Ethan roared, his voice cutting through the noise. He drew his knife and slashed the hitching rope of the nearest horse, then slapped the animal hard on the flank. He moved down the line, cutting ropes, spooking the animals. Panic erupted. Horses reared and bolted into the street, colliding with the men running toward the sheriff's office. In the chaos, Ethan vaulted onto the roan. He spurred the horse through the smoke, riding straight into the teeth of the mob. He saw a small, dark shape limping at the end of the alley. Naylin. She looked up, her face a mask of blood and dust. She lunged toward him, but her injured ankle finally gave out. She crumbled, hitting the dirt. Ethan did not stop. He leaned low from the saddle, risking his balance, risking everything. He swept his arm down. Naylin reached up, their hands locked, grip to wrist, skin to skin, with a grunt of effort that tore at the muscles in his back. Ethan hauled her up. She swung her leg over the cantle, pressing her body against his back. The roan groaned under the sudden double weight but surged forward. Bullets began to zip around them like angry hornets. One struck the pommel of the saddle, sending leather flying. Another kicked up a spray of dirt into the horse's face. Ethan drove the horse hard, weaving through the scattering crowd, past the burning stable, and out into the black mouth of the desert. They rode until the lungs of the horse sounded like bellows working a forge. The terrain shifted from the flat mining roads to the washboard trails of the foothills. The mesquite tore at their clothes, thorns seeking purchase in skin. Behind them, the pursuit was organized and fast. These were not drunken townsfolk anymore. This was the deputy and Mercer's paid guns, They had fresh mounts and lanterns that bobbed in the distance like eyes of deep-sea fish. The roan stumbled. It was a bad stumble, the front knees buckling. Ethan fought the reins, pulling the animal's head up, but he felt the change in the gait immediately. The horse was lamed. Ethan pulled up near a cluster of boulders at the base of a steep, rocky hill. He swung down and caught Nayland as she slid off. The horse stood with its head low, foam dripping from its mouth, favoring the left foreleg. Ethan put a hand on the animal's neck. He felt the tremors in the beast's muscles. This horse had carried him through 3 years of solitude. It was the only living thing he had spoken to for 1,000 nights. "We have to leave him," Nayland whispered. She saw the pain in Ethan's face. Ethan unbuckled the saddlebag and the rifle scabbard. He stripped the saddle off, leaving the horse light. He took his hat off and swatted the horse hard on the rump. "Go," he said, his voice thick. "Go south." The horse hesitated, nuzzling Ethan's shoulder, then turned and limped away into the darkness, drawing a line of scent and noise away from where they would climb. Ethan watched it go for a second, a piece of his heart tearing loose. Then he turned to Nayland. "Climb," he said. They scrambled up the rocks, moving on hands and knees. Nayland's ankle was a dead weight. She dragged it, biting her tongue to keep from crying out. Ethan stayed below her, pushing her up, his hand steady on her back. They found a fissure in the rock, a dry cave barely deep enough to hide 2 bodies. They slid inside, pressing themselves into the dust and bat guano. 10 minutes later, the posse arrived below. Ethan and Nayland lay in the dark, not breathing. They could hear the horses blowing, the creak of leather, the sound of boots on stone. "Lost the tracks here," a voice said. "Look at the ground. Horse went south, limping. He rode it into the ground," the deputy's voice said. "He's cruel like that. Renegades don't care about animals." Laughter rippled through the group. It was an ugly sound. "When we catch the girl," another man said, his voice low and wet, "I claim first rights. She's got spirit. I want to see her eyes when we break it." Nayland squeezed her eyes shut. Her hands flew to her ears, pressing hard. The men laughed again, making jokes about rope and knives and what makes a woman scream loudest. Beside her, Ethan felt Nayland begin to shake. It wasn't the shivering of cold. It was a vibration that came from the center of her bones. She was gasping for air, short, sharp intakes that sounded like a drowning swimmer. Flashbacks hit her in waves. She wasn't in the cave anymore. She was back in her village, smelling the smoke, feeling the rough hands of the traffickers, hearing her uncle die. The nausea rolled over her. Ethan holstered his pistol. He took her hands away from her ears and gripped them firmly. "Nayland," he whispered. She stared at him, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Look at my hands," Ethan said. His voice was a low rumble, beneath the hearing of the men outside. "Look at the dirt on my knuckles. Look at the scar." He forced her to focus on the physical reality of the present. "You are here," he said. "You are in the stone. I am here. They are outside." He did not promise they would be safe. He promised they were together. Nayland focused on the scar on his hand. She anchored herself to it. The shaking began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard anger. The posse eventually mounted up and rode south, following the false trail of the lamed horse. But they left 2 men behind to watch the pass. Survival became a slow, starving work. They could not move by day. They lay in the fissure, sharing the last of the tepid water from the canteen. The heat of the day turned the rock oven hot, baking the moisture out of their bodies. 2 nights later, a pebble clattered into the cave. Ethan had his knife out before the sound stopped echoing. "It is me," a voice whispered. Maria Lujan slid into the cave. She carried a sack of corn cakes and a water skin. She looked exhausted, her dress torn from the brush. She handed the water to Nayland first. "Mercer has gone to the fort," Maria said, "watching them eat. He spoke to the colonel. He told them you are leading a band of hostiles. Ethan, he said you have gone rogue, that you are killing civilians." Ethan stopped chewing. The food turned to ash in his mouth. "My commander?" Ethan asked. "Colonel Barton. He signed the order this morning," Maria said. You are classified as a renegade scout. The order is to bring you in alive if possible, dead if necessary. Ethan closed his eyes. He leaned his head back against the stone. The army had been his life, then his shame, and now it was his executioner. His past had finally caught him. He wasn't just hiding from a corrupt businessman anymore. He was hiding from the flag he had once served. There is a bounty on you both now, Maria added. $5,000 for the pair. Every drifter in the territory is looking for tracks. Naylin lowered the waterskin. She wiped her mouth. She reached into her shirt and pulled out the ledger. We stop running, she said. Ethan looked at her. If we run, they catch us. Naylin said. The soldiers, the bounty hunters. The land is full of eyes. We cannot hide. What do you want to do? Ethan asked. We strike, she said. She opened the ledger to the last page. I read this while we waited. She said, there is a shipment listed for tomorrow night. The boy who bites, Taza, and 3 women. They are moving them to the railhead at midnight to avoid the heat. If we take the shipment, Ethan said, slowly realizing the shape of her thought. We get the witnesses. We get the witnesses, Naylin said. And we get the truth. They moved out at dusk, leaving Maria to return to town to keep her ears open. They traveled cross-country, through a land that was brutal even by the standards of the territory. The wind cut through their clothes like razor blades. The rocks were sharp enough to slice through boot leather. They reached the convoy trail at midnight. It was a narrow pass between 2 looming buttes. Ethan lay on the ridge, looking down the barrel of his Winchester. The convoy appeared as a line of shadows. 3 wagons, 6 outriders, and 1 man in a blue uniform. Ethan lowered the rifle for a second. A soldier. Mercer had convinced the colonel to send an escort for his commercial goods. Proof that the system was tangled together so tightly you couldn't cut one string without pulling the whole knot tight. If we shoot the soldier, Ethan whispered, there is no going back, ever. Naylin looked at him. They are stealing children. Ethan, there is no going back now. She was right. They didn't start with shooting. They started with the land. Ethan had wedged a large boulder on the rim of the pass, levering it with a sturdy piece of ironwood. As the lead wagon entered the choke point, he kicked the brace out. The boulder crashed down, taking a slide of shale and dust with it. It didn't hit the wagon, but it slammed into the path in front of it with a sound like the earth cracking open. The lead horses reared, screaming. The wagon jackknifed. Now! Ethan yelled. He fired into the air. Naylin, positioned on the opposite ridge, hurled stones and screamed a war cry that echoed off the canyon walls, making it sound like 20 men instead of 1 woman. Confusion reigned. The horses, already spooked by the rock slide, went wild at the gunfire. 2 of the outriders were thrown. The soldier fought to control his mount. Ethan slid down the scree slope, dust billowing around him. He hit the ground running, heading for the second wagon, the one with the canvas tied down tight. A guard saw him. Hey! Ethan didn't stop. He swung the butt of his rifle, catching the man in the stomach, then followed through with a heavy blow to the jaw. The man went down. Ethan slashed the canvas ties with his knife. He ripped the fabric back. Inside, huddled in the dark, were 4 women and 2 boys. They were bound with rope, their mouths gagged with rags. The smell of fear and urine washed over him. Ethan scrambled inside. He cut the ropes on the nearest woman. Run, he shouted. Up the slope! Naylin appeared at the tailgate. She climbed in, her eyes scanning the faces frantically. She saw him. He was curled in the corner, smaller than she remembered. His hair had been shorn close to his scalp. His face was thin, the cheekbones sharp as blades. Taza! She screamed. The boy looked up. His eyes were flat, old, and dead. He looked at her, and there was no recognition. Only the flinch of a dog that expects to be kicked. It broke her heart more than if he had been dead. Taza! It is Naylin! She reached for him. He snapped at her hand, his teeth clicking together. Naylin didn't pull back. She grabbed him, pulling him into her arms, holding him tight even as he struggled. We have to go! Ethan shouted from the driver's seat. He had cut the traces of the wagon horses. The soldier had regained control of his mount. He leveled his pistol at the wagon. "Stop! In the name of the United States Army." Ethan looked at the uniform. He looked at the women huddled behind him. He raised his rifle. He didn't shoot the man, he shot the horse. The animal dropped, sending the soldiers sprawling into the dust. Ethan grabbed Nolan and Taza. "Move!" They fled into the canyon, a ragged group of survivors stumbling over the rocks. The guards were regrouping, their shots pinging off the stone around them. Nolan half-carried Taza. Ethan supported a woman whose legs were cramped from days of confinement. They reached the cover of the ravine, but a shot rang out, a lucky, long-range shot from a high-powered rifle. One of the women, a young mother named Elena, whom they had just cut free, gasped. She pitched forward, hitting the ground face first. Nolan dropped to her knees beside her. She turned Elena over. The front of her dress was already dark with blood. The bullet had taken her in the back, punching through the lung. Elena looked at Nolan. Her mouth opened, but only blood bubbled out. Her eyes went wide, then fixed on the stars. She was gone. "Leave her!" Ethan grabbed Nolan's arm. "We can't carry the dead." Nolan looked at the body. Then she looked at Taza, who was staring at the dead woman with no expression at all. They ran. They carried the wounded survivors who could still breathe. It was slow. It was costly. It was human. They did not stop until they reached the high crags, miles away. The next day, the response from the fort was brutal. A patrol of cavalry swept the area. They didn't care who was guilty. They burned a small rancheria of peaceful Papago Indians nearby, just because they were there. Mercer's men found Elena's body. They didn't bury her. They hung her from a mesquite tree at the crossroads with a sign, "Apache whore." Nolan saw it through the spyglass from the ridge. She lowered the glass. Her face was terrifying. It was not grief. It was a cold, black desire for annihilation. "I want them dead," she whispered. "All of them. I want to cut their throats while they sleep." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. She felt like vibrating steel. "If you go down that road," Ethan said, his voice heavy with his own ghosts, "you never come back. I know. I am still trying to walk back from it." She spun on him. "They killed her. They killed my family." "They turned my brother into a ghost. What is your law doing, Ethan? Where is your justice?" "There is no justice here," Ethan said. "Only what we make. But if we become them, we lose." They took the survivors to a hidden camp deep in the Dragoon Mountains. It was a small band led by a war leader named Victorio, a man who was tired of running but too proud to surrender. The camp was hidden in a box canyon, guarded by sentries who watched the approach. When they rode in, the welcome was cold. Victorio looked at the survivors, at Taza, and then at Ethan. He walked up to Ethan's horse. He looked at the white face, the army coat. "You bring the death with you," Victorio said. "He is helping us," Nolan said, stepping between them. "He saved Taza. He is a scout," Victorio said, spitting on the ground. "I know his face. He led the Bluecoats to the Salt River. That was a long time ago," Ethan said. Victorio shook his head. "The soldiers follow you. If you stay, they will find us. We cannot fight the whole army. I have women. I have old ones." He pointed to the canyon entrance. "Go." Nolan turned to Victorio. "If he goes, I go." "No," Victorio said. "You are of the blood. The boys of the blood. You stay. You heal. But the white man goes." Nolan looked at Ethan. Panic rose in her chest. Ethan looked at the camp. He saw the fear in the eyes of the people. He saw that his presence was a death sentence for them. "He is right," Ethan said. Nolan grabbed his coat. "No, we ride together." "Not here," Ethan said gently. "I draw the fire. Nolan, I have to lead them away from you." He reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out the copy of the ledger Nolan had stolen. "You stay. Heal Taza. Bring him back to himself." He handed her the canteen. "I am going to find a judge," Ethan said. "A real one. I heard Judge Holloway is riding circuit in Tucson. He hates Mercer." "It is a trap," Nolan said, tears welling in her eyes. "It is a chance," Ethan said. He swung up onto a fresh horse the Apache band had reluctantly traded him. He looked down at her. "I will come back," he said. He turned the horse and rode out, leaving his heart standing in the dust. The separation felt like a physical wound, a ripping of tissue. Naylin watched him go until he was a speck in the vastness. Then she turned to Taza. She sat down in the dirt and began to speak to him in their own language, trying to find the boy buried under the layers of trauma. Ethan rode for 3 days. He found Judge Holloway in a dusty back room of a saloon in a rail town, nursing a whiskey and a cough. The judge was an old man, his face like crumpled parchment, weary of a territory that seemed determined to kill itself. His clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, looked terrified when Ethan walked in. "I have a warrant for your arrest." "Cole," the judge wheezed. "I know," Ethan said. He slammed the ledger onto the table, but read this first. The judge opened the book. He read the names. He read the amounts. He looked at the signature of the deputy. "Mercer," the judge muttered. "That son of a bitch." He looked at Ethan. "This is proof of slavery. Federal crimes. Will you sign the warrants?" Ethan asked. The judge hesitated. He looked at his clerk. He looked at his whiskey. "If I sign these, I might not live to see the trial." "If you don't sign them," Ethan said, leaning on the table, "you are just another man on Mercer's payroll." The judge picked up his pen. His hand shook, but he signed. "It's fragile paper," the judge said, handing the warrants to Ethan. "It won't stop a bullet, but it's the law." Ethan took the papers. He rode back hard, pushing the horse to its limit. He was 10 miles from the Apache camp when he smelled it. Smoke. It was not the smell of a campfire. It was the thick, greasy smell of burning hide and flesh. Ethan reined in on a ridge. He looked toward the Dragoon Mountains. A column of black smoke was rising into the still air, marking the spot where he had left Nolan. Mercer's deputy had not found them, but he had found where they had been. He had raided the area, burning the brush, poisoning the wells, scorching the earth to punish the absence of his prey. Ethan stared at the smoke. The legal papers in his pocket felt suddenly very light and very useless. He spurred his horse into a gallop, riding toward the fire. The smell of the burn reached Ethan Cole 2 miles before he saw the ground. It was not the scent of a campfire, nor the clean, sharp smell of a brush clearing. It was the heavy, greasy stench of destruction, charred hide, melted tallow, and the carbonized remains of shelter. When he crested the ridge, the devastation lay below him like a black scar on the earth. The hidden camp in the Dragoon foothills was gone, where wickiups had stood. There were only circles of ash and twisted blackened poles pointing at the sky like accusing fingers. Ethan rode down slowly, his chest tight with a dread that felt like a physical weight. The silence was absolute. No dogs barked, no birds sang. The deputy's men had done their work with a thoroughness that spoke of hate, not just duty. He dismounted and walked through the ruin. He found a broken grinding stone, a child's doll made of corn husks that had been trampled into the mud, and the carcass of a mule shot through the head. But he found no bodies of people. He knelt in the ash, looking for sign. The ground was a mess of hoof prints, shod horses, heavy and aggressive, overlaid with the lighter. Frantic tracks of moccasins fleeing. They had run, they had scattered like quail before a hawk. Ethan found a single set of tracks that he recognized. The print was small, the heel striking deep. Naylin. She had been carrying weight. He remounted and turned his horse toward the high peaks. The tracks led up, into the cruel vertical country where horses broke their legs and white men lost their lungs. It was a climb into thin air and sharp stone, a place of no mercy. He tracked them for 2 days. The air grew cold, biting through his duster. The pine trees thinned out, replaced by jagged granite and wind-scoured scrub. He found them in a fissure of rock near the timberline. They were huddled together for warmth. Nalin, Taza, Maria Lujan, and the 3 other women they had pulled from the wagon. They looked less like people and more like parts of the mountain, gray with dust and shivering with a bone-deep cold. Ethan whistled low, a bob-white call. Before he approached, Naylin appeared from behind a boulder. She held a Winchester rifle, taken, he assumed, from the ambush at the wagon, leveled at his chest. Her finger was tight on the trigger. "It is me," Ethan said, holding his hands out, palms open. She did not lower the gun immediately. Her eyes scanned him, checking the trail behind him, checking the sky. She was changed. The terrified girl who had begged for a ride in the ravine was gone. In her place was a woman who had seen her world burn twice. Her face was gaunt, the skin pulled tight over her cheekbones, and her eyes were hard, polished stones that reflected everything but absorbed nothing. She lowered the rifle slowly. "You are alone?" she asked. Her voice was raspy from the altitude. "I am alone," Ethan said. He dismounted and walked to her. He wanted to hold her, but the air around her felt charged, brittle. He stopped a foot away. "The camp?" she asked. "Gone," Ethan said, "but no bodies. They ran." Naylin nodded. It was a small mercy, but mercy nonetheless. Ethan looked past her to where Taza sat. The boy was wrapped in a torn blanket, staring at a patch of lichen on the rock. He did not look up. He was alive, but his spirit seemed to have retreated deep inside, hiding in a place where no one could touch him. "I have the warrants," Ethan said, tapping his chest pocket. "Judge Holloway signed them, but we have to go back down. We have to go to Tucson." "To the wolves?" Naylin asked. "To the court," Ethan said. "It is a federal hearing. If we testify, if we put the ledger in the record, Mercer loses his protection." Naylin looked at the shivering women. She looked at Taza. "The law is a weapon they use against us," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then let us take the gun out of their hands and use it." They descended the mountain in silence. It took 3 days to reach the valley floor, and another 2 to reach the outskirts of Tucson. They moved like ghosts, avoiding the main roads, terrified that a patrol would spot them before they could reach the sanctuary of the federal marshal's custody. Taza refused to speak. He ate when food was put in his hand. He walked when he was told to walk. But on the second night, as they camped in a dry wash, he looked at Ethan across the fire. "Mercer," the boy whispered. Ethan looked up. It was the first word the boy had spoken in days. "Mercer," Taza said again. The name sounded like poison in his mouth. He came to the shed. He looked at my teeth. Ethan's hand tightened on his coffee cup. "We are going to make him pay." "Taza," Ethan said. Taza looked at the fire. "You cannot kill him with paper." Ethan had no answer for that. They entered Tucson under the guard of 2 deputies sent by the marshal, who had met them at the edge of the territory. The news of the renegade scout and the Apache girl had traveled fast. The streets went quiet as they rode in. It was not a respectful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a storm about to break. Men stopped on the boardwalks, their hands drifting to their belts. Women pulled their children behind their skirts. Someone spat as Naylin passed. "Whore!" a voice shouted from a balcony. A woman in a bonnet made the sign of the cross, staring at Naylin as if she were a demon summoned from the pit. Naylin did not flinch. She rode with her back straight, looking dead ahead. She had prepared herself for this. She let their hatred wash over her like rain on oil. It touched her, but she would not let it soak in. They were housed in a secure wing of the territorial courthouse, a stone building that smelled of dust and old tobacco. They waited there for 2 days while the legal machinery ground into gear. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. The heat was stifling, a thick soup of sweat, wool suits, and tension. Every seat was taken. People stood along the back walls, craning their necks to see the spectacle. Ethan sat at the defense table, wearing a clean shirt the marshal had provided, though he still wore his worn trail boots. Naylin sat beside him, dressed in a simple calico dress Maria had found. She looked small in the chair, her feet barely touching the floor. Then the doors opened, and Silas Mercer entered. He was a contrast in every way. He wore a tailored gray suit, a silk vest, and polished boots that shone in the shaft of sunlight falling from the high windows. He was smiling. He shook hands with the town councilman in the front row. He nodded to the shopkeepers. He looked like civilization itself, prosperous, confident, and untouchable. Behind him walked the sheriff, looking uncomfortable in a stiff collar, and Deputy Frank Miller. Miller caught Nalen's eye. He smirked, a slow, greasy curling of his lip that said, "You are just a thing that has returned to its owner." The judge pounded his gavel. "Order!" The hearing began. It was a fight from the first moment. Mercer's lawyer, a sharp-faced man from the East, painted a picture of chaos. He claimed Ethan was a drunkard, a man broken by the war who had kidnapped a young woman and hallucinated a conspiracy. The sheriff took the stand. He testified with practiced ease. "We have no records of missing children," the sheriff said, looking earnestly at the judge. "Mr. Mercer runs a clean operation. He takes in orphans. Yes, he gives them work. He gives them a future." "Lies," Ethan whispered, his fists clenching under the table. Then it was Ethan's turn. He walked to the stand. He did not sit. He stood, his hands gripping the railing. "State your name and history," the lawyer said. "Ethan Cole." He said, "Formerly Sergeant Cole, 3rd Cavalry. You were a scout?" "I was." "And you left the service?" "Why?" Ethan looked at Nalen. He looked at the room full of people who hated him. He knew that to make them believe the truth about Mercer, he had to give them the truth about himself. He had to bleed for them. "I left because I could not wash the blood off," Ethan said. His voice carried to the back of the room. "I guided soldiers to the Salt River," Ethan continued. "I told them it was a raiding party. It was a winter camp. Women, old men." The room murmured. "I watched them die." Ethan said, "I did nothing. I was a coward who followed orders." The judge leaned forward. The admission hung in the air, heavy and ugly. "I am not a good man," Ethan said, "but I know what slavery looks like, and I know what I saw in that shed." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the ledger. "This is the sheriff's book," Ethan said. Mercer's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! Stolen property! Evidence!" Ethan shouted back. He opened the book. He read the names. He read the dates. He read the prices paid for human beings. The room shifted. The smug confidence on Mercer's face faltered for a fraction of a second. Then Taza was called. The boy walked to the chair. He looked tiny. The bailiff had to help him up. "Tell the court what happened," the judge said gently. Taza looked at Mercer. "He checked my teeth," Taza said. His voice was high, clear, and cutting. "He said I was a biter. He told the man to put me in the smelter because I would not work the sorting belt. He put chains on my ankle," Taza said. He pulled up his pant leg. The scars from the irons were fresh, angry red lines against his brown skin. There were others. Taza said, "Sarah, little bird. They took them away at night. The crowd reacted. Some gasped. Some muttered in denial. It can't be true, not Mercer." But others looked at the scars and felt the uncomfortable prickle of truth. Mercer's lawyer stood up. He knew he was losing the room. He needed to destroy the credibility of the witnesses. He turned his eyes to Nalen. "Call the woman," he said. Nalen took the stand. She sat straight, her hands folded in her lap. "You claim this man, Mr. Cole, rescued you," the lawyer said, pacing in front of her. "But isn't it true that you were traveling alone with him for weeks? Sleeping in the same blanket?" "We survived," Nalen said. "Isn't it true," the lawyer pressed, his voice dripping with insinuation, "that you offered yourself to him, that you used your feminine wiles to bewitch a lonely, broken man into attacking a respected businessman?" He turned to the crowd. "She is a seductress, a savage who twisted this man's mind." Mercer nodded from his table, looking sorrowful, as if he were the victim of a great manipulation. Nalen stood up. She did not shout. She spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. "I offered myself," she said. The crowd gasped. The lawyer smiled triumphantly. "I begged him." Nalen said, "I told him, take me on your horse, and I will give you something no woman can give you." She looked at the women in the audience. "I said those words because I have learned that in your world. That is the only value a woman like me has. I have learned that men do not listen to pleas for mercy. They listen to offers of flesh." She turned to look at Ethan. He refused. She said, "He gave me water. He gave me his coat. He fought for me, and he never took what I offered." She turned back to Mercer. Her eyes burned him. "The savagery is not in my blood." She said, "It is in yours. It is in what you did to me and to the children you sold. You are the animal, Mr. Mercer. You just wear a better suit." The silence that followed was absolute. The lawyer stood with his mouth open. The shame of her words landed on the crowd like a physical weight. She had turned her humiliation into an indictment of their entire society. The judge cleared his throat. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Taza's scars. He picked up his pen. "I am issuing federal warrants," the judge said, his voice shaking slightly, "for the arrest of the foreman of the Copper Queen mine and for Deputy Frank Miller for suspicion of trafficking." Panic rippled through Mercer's table. The deputy, Miller, stood up, his hand going to his gun, but the marshal stepped forward. Miller backed down, snarling, and slipped out the side door before he could be detained. Mercer stood up. "This is an outrage," he declared. "I will appeal to the governor. Court is adjourned." The judge banged the gavel, but the victory was only on paper. As night fell, the town turned dangerous. The panic had set in among Mercer's men. They needed to erase the evidence before the federal warrants could be executed in the morning. From the window of the boarding house where the marshal had placed them, Ethan saw the glow of fire in the distance. "They are burning the records shed at the mine," Ethan said. "It is starting," Nayland said. At midnight, the attack came. There was no warning. The glass of the front window shattered. Gunfire erupted from the street, raking the front of the boarding house. "Get down!" Ethan shouted. He flipped the table, shoving Taza and the women behind it. He drew his revolver and returned fire through the broken window. The marshal's deputies were overwhelmed. One went down with a bullet in his shoulder. The back door kicked open. Hired gunmen poured in, their faces covered with bandanas. It was not a battle. It was an assassination attempt. Ethan fired, dropped a man, cocked the hammer, fired again. Nayland was beside him, using the Winchester she had kept. She fired with cold precision, levering the action as fast as she could. It was messy. Terrified survival. Smoke filled the room. The screams of the women mixed with the roar of the guns. In the chaos, a figure lunged from the shadows of the hallway. It was Frank Miller. He didn't go for Ethan. He went for the leverage. He grabbed Taza by the hair. The boy screamed. Miller dragged him backward, jamming a pistol against the boy's temple. "Stop!" Miller roared. "Drop the guns or I paint the wall with him." The shooting stopped. The silence rang in their ears. Ethan froze. Nayland lowered her rifle, her breath hitching in her chest. Miller grinned. His face was streaked with soot and sweat. "You throw them down," he said. "Now!" Nayland looked at Taza's terrified eyes. She looked at Miller. Old instincts flared, the instinct to surrender, to trade herself for the life of the boy. She stepped forward, opening her hands. "I will go with you," she said. "Let him go." "No!" Ethan shouted. He stepped in front of her. He looked at Nayland. "Not like that," he said. "Not ever again. We don't trade lives." He looked at Miller. "You take him out that door, Frank, and you are a dead man walking. There is nowhere to run." Miller laughed. "I got the water rights. I got the land. Mercer promised me the valley. I ain't running. I'm negotiating." Miller backed out of the door, dragging Taza with him. He vanished into the night. Ethan and Nayland did not wait. They went out the window, ignoring the shouts of the marshal. They tracked him. The trail led out of town, away from the mine, toward the old abandoned homesteads in the ravine, the place where the water rights war had started years ago. The moon was a blade in the sky, sharp and white. The wind howled through the dry grass. They found them at a tumble-down shack at the edge of the precipice. Miller was inside, using the walls for cover. Taza was tied to a chair in the center of the room, visible through the open door. Ethan and Nayland crouched in the high grass 20 yards away. "He wants us to come in," Ethan whispered. "It's a kill box." "I go left," Nayland said. "You go right." Ethan nodded. "Be fast." He stood up. "Miller," he shouted, "let the boy go. It's over. Mercer is done." Miller's voice floated out. "Mercer might be done, but I'm rich. Coal. This land is gold. The water is gold. We drive the Apaches out, and every drop belongs to us. That's the plan. It always was." Ethan moved as he spoke, drifting to the right. "I'll give you a deal." "Frank," Ethan yelled. "You walk away. You leave the boy, I won't shoot you in the back." Miller laughed. "A deal? From a traitor scout? I'd rather kill you and take the reward." Miller leaned out the window, firing at Ethan's voice. Naylin broke cover on the left. She sprinted toward the door, low and fast. Miller saw her. He swung his gun. Ethan broke cover, firing as he ran. His bullet hit the wood frame near Miller's head, forcing him to duck. Naylin hit the door. She didn't stop. She dove into the room, rolling across the floor. Miller spun around, raising his gun at her. Naylin kicked out, her boot connecting with his knee. Miller buckled, cursing. Ethan burst through the door. Miller fired wild. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Ethan's coat, grazing his arm. Ethan didn't stop. He tackled Miller, driving him back against the rotting wall. They crashed through the wood, spilling out onto the dirt of the porch. It was a brutal, ugly fight. There was no technique. It was fists and knees and desperation. Miller was strong. Fueled by greed and rage, he punched Ethan in the jaw, stunning him. He reached for his fallen gun. Naylin was there. She picked up a heavy rock from the ground. She brought it down on Miller's hand just as his fingers touched the steel. Bones crunched. Miller screamed. He rolled over, pulling a knife from his boot with his good hand. He slashed at Naylin, cutting her skirt, drawing a line of blood on her thigh. Ethan roared. He lunged, grabbing Miller's wrist. He twisted it, using the leverage of his body weight. They grappled in the dust, rolling toward the edge of the ravine. Miller's eyes were wild. "I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you." Ethan looked at the man. He saw the pure, unadulterated hate. He saw the man who had hunted Naylin like an animal, who had chained children in a shed. Ethan didn't hesitate. He drove his knee into Miller's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Then he grabbed the knife hand and drove it down. The blade went into Miller's chest. Miller gasped. His eyes went wide. He stared at Ethan, then up at the moon. The hate drained out of his face, replaced by a sudden, blank surprise. He went limp. Ethan rolled off him. He lay in the dirt, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm. Naylin crawled to him. She touched his face. "It is done," she whispered. They went back into the shack. Naylin cut Taza loose. The boy fell into her arms, sobbing, great, heaving sobs that finally broke the dam of his silence. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them. He looked at the dead deputy in the dirt. It wasn't a triumph. It was just final. It was sickening. They walked back toward the town as dawn broke. But as they neared the outskirts, they saw the crowd. Mercer was there, standing on a wagon. He was shouting to a mob of armed men. "Look!" Mercer yelled, pointing at Ethan and Naylin as they emerged from the brush. "They have killed a deputy! They murdered Frank Miller!" The mob roared. The nuance of the courtroom, the testimony, the ledger, it all vanished in the face of fresh blood. "See?" Mercer shouted. "They are killers! They are savages!" Ethan stopped. He held Naylin and Taza back. They didn't see a rescue. They didn't see justice. They saw a white man dead and an Apache standing over him. "We can't go back in," Ethan said. "The warrants won't protect us now." Naylin looked at the mob. She looked at Ethan. "We are fugitives again," she said. Ethan took her hand. He took Taza's hand. "Then we'd run," he said. Mercer was organizing the men into a line. A full-scale manhunt was forming. The law had sparked a moment of justice in that courtroom, but it was too weak a flame to hold back the darkness of hatred. They turned back toward the mountains, toward the high, cold places where the law could not follow, but where they would have to live as ghosts to survive. The wind did not howl in the high country. It screamed. It came down from the peaks of the Mongolian rim with a razor edge, stripping the heat from the land and turning the breath in a man's lungs to ice. Winter had not just arrived. It had laid siege to the territory. Ethan Cole, Nalin, Taza, and the 3 remaining women from the rescue huddled in an abandoned trapping cabin nestled in a fissure of gray granite. It was a rough structure. Logs chinked with mud that had long since cracked, letting the drafts hiss through like snakes. Outside, the snow was 3 feet deep and drifting higher, sealing the passes and turning the world into a blinding sheet of white. Hunger was a constant, gnawing presence. It sat with them in the circle around the small, smokeless fire Ethan tended with obsessive care. They boiled pine needle tea and ate a slurry made from the last of the cornmeal and snow. Every sound outside, the crack of a frozen branch, the thud of a snow load shifting, sounded like a rifle hammer being cocked. Under the crushing weight of stress and starvation, the bond between Ethan and Nalin did not fracture. It hardened, like iron quenched in snow. It lived in the tiny moments that the cold forced upon them. Ethan sat by the fire, rubbing grease into the action of his Winchester. His hands were stiff, the knuckles raw and cracked from the cold. Nalin moved to him. She did not speak. She simply took his hands in hers. Her skin was rough, but her warmth was startling. She rubbed his hands between hers, bringing the blood back to his fingers. Ethan looked at her. In the dim light, with hollows under her cheekbones and her hair braided tight against the wind, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Not because she was pretty, but because she was there. She was alive. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. It was a quiet kiss, not on the lips, but a sharing of breath, a mingling of the small amount of heat they had left. "We will not starve," he whispered. "I will find a deer tomorrow." Nalin nodded against his skin. "I know." Taza watched them from the corner. The boy had changed. The terror that had locked his jaw in the courtroom had been replaced by a watchful, feral silence. He shadowed Nalin everywhere. If she moved to the door, he was there. If she slept, he curled up against her back. He was learning to trust that he would not be taken again. But his eyes remained old, scanning the shadows for the monsters he knew were real. A week later, a traveler struggled up the trail, a cousin of Maria Lujan, riding a mule that was chest-deep in powder. He brought news wrapped in a leather packet. "Mercer is free," the man said, warming his hands by their fire. He was questioned. "Yes, but he has dined with the governor 3 times since the hearing. They say the evidence was circumstantial." Ethan felt the rage rise in his throat like bile. The ledger, the testimony, the scars on Taza's legs, circumstantial. "The judge?" Ethan asked. The man shook his head. "Judge Holloway has retired. A sudden illness, they say, after a brick was thrown through his window with a note wrapped around it. The witnesses you left in town, 2 have vanished. The others have changed their stories. They say they were confused. They say they were coached by the Apache woman. Justice was crumbling. Fear was doing the work that money started." That night, Ethan sat cleaning his revolver. He spun the cylinder. 1 bullet. That was all it would take. He could ride down, find Mercer in his silk vest, and put a piece of lead in his heart. It would be over. Nalin watched him. She knew what he was thinking. "I dream of it," she said softly. Ethan stopped spinning the cylinder. "In my sleep, I walk into his house." Nalin said, "I take my knife, I cut him, and I feel good. I feel light." She looked at her hands, ashamed. "But if we do that," Ethan said, his voice heavy, "we prove them right. We become the savages they say we are. And Taza learns that blood is the only law. We have to finish it the right way," Nalin said. "Or we die trying." The traveler had mentioned a federal marshal passing through the rail hub of Wilcox, 40 miles south, a man named Marshal Earp, known to be stubborn and deaf to local politics. It was their final play, undeniable proof, delivered to a man who couldn't be bought, outside of Mercer's immediate kingdom. They left the cabin 2 days later. The journey was a descent into hell. The blizzard caught them on the ridge, a whiteout that erased the sky and the earth. They tied themselves together with rope, Ethan in the lead, breaking trail, Nalin behind him, then Taza and the women. They moved blindly, heads down, eyelashes freezing shut. The wind whipped ice crystals against their skin until their faces were raw. At night, the wolves trailed them. Ethan could see their eyes reflecting the moonlight, green sparks in the darkness. They were patient hunters, waiting for a stumble, a weakness. They were no different from the men Mercer had hired. On the third day, they reached the lower foothills. The snow thinned to slush and mud. They encountered a small wagon train heading west. 3 families with oxen that looked as gaunt as the refugees. Ethan rode forward, his hands raised. "We have women and a child," he called out. "We have no food. Can you trade? I have silver." The wagon master, a bearded man with a shotgun across his lap, looked at Ethan. He looked at the huddled figures behind him. His eyes landed on Nalin, on her buckskins, on Taza's dark face. "We don't trade with Indians," the man said, "spitting into the mud, or with the white trash that runs with them. Keep moving." Ethan felt the heat of violence flare in his chest. He had silver. He wasn't begging. "Please." One of the women from the rescue stepped forward. Her name was Sarah. "We are starving. Get back." The wagon master cocked the hammer of his shotgun. "I said keep moving before I bury the lot of you." Prejudice was not an abstract concept. It was a wall that cost lives. Ethan backed away, his hand hovering near his gun. But he saw the fear in the wagon master's eyes. A shooting war here would help no one. They walked past the wagons, heads bowed against the hate. Half a mile down the trail, Ethan heard a whistle. He turned. An older woman from the last wagon was standing by a rock. She looked back at the wagon train to ensure she wasn't seen. She pointed to the ground behind a mesquite bush, then hurried away. Ethan went to the bush. Wrapped in a piece of oilcloth were 2 loaves of stale bread and a wool blanket. It was a crumb of humanity, a glimmer of hope breaking through the fear. They reached the rail hub of Wilcox as the sun was setting on the 4th day. The town was a sprawl of cattle pens and loading docks, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and dung. The federal marshal was at the telegraph office. He was a tall man with a mustache that hid his mouth and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Ethan's story. He looked at the ledger. He looked at Taza. "I have heard of you." "Cole," the marshal said. "The army wants you hung. Mercer wants you shot. You are making a lot of noise for a dead man." "I am not dead yet," Ethan said. "And neither are these witnesses." The marshal tapped the ledger. "This book, if it's real, it ties Mercer to a federal crime ring. Slavery, kidnapping. I can move on this, but I need to secure the mine records before they burn the rest. And I need these people alive to testify in a federal court, not a territorial one." "We will keep them alive," Nalin said. Gunfire interrupted them. It erupted near the river crossing at the edge of town, where the women were washing the dust from their faces while Ethan spoke to the marshal. Mercer's men, they had been watching the town. They struck first. Ethan ran toward the sound, the marshal on his heels. The scene was chaos. Horses were screaming. Bullets chipped stone from the riverbank. Nalin was behind a fallen log, firing her Winchester. Taza was flat on the ground, covering his head. Sarah, the woman who had pleaded for bread, was standing over Taza, trying to shield him with her body. "Get down!" Ethan roared. A shot rang out, a sharp, flat crack from a high-powered rifle. Sarah jerked. A red bloom appeared on her chest. She crumpled, falling across Taza. "No!" Nalin screamed. Ethan reached them. He dragged Taza out from under the body. He grabbed Nalin, pulling her down as bullets chewed up the wood of the log. Sarah was dead. She had survived the shed, the chains, the mountain, and the blizzard, only to die in the mud of a riverbank because she refused to move. The marshal's deputies arrived, pouring fire into the brush. Mercer's men, realizing they had lost the element of surprise, fell back, disappearing into the twilight. Nalin stared at Sarah's body. She began to shake. It was a silent, terrifying vibration. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with a grief that threatened to shatter her mind. Ethan pulled her into his arms. He held her head against his chest, muffling the sound of her sobs. He did not tell her it would be okay. He did not lie. He held her, absorbing the pain, letting his own heart break along with hers. Love did not cancel the pain. It just meant she didn't have to carry it alone. "We have to finish this," Ethan whispered into her hair. "For Sarah. For all of them." The marshal looked at the dead woman. His face hardened. "I am arresting Silas Mercer," the marshal said. "Tonight." They moved on the mine office an hour later. The marshal had gathered 10 men. Ethan and Nolan walked with them, not as prisoners, but as the tip of the spear. The mine office was a fortress of brick and iron at the head of the main shaft. Mercer was inside. He had not run. His arrogance anchored him. He had barricaded the doors with hired guns. "Come out, Mercer!" the marshal shouted. "By order of the United States government." A window opened. Mercer appeared. He looked pale, but he was still smiling that practiced, shark-like smile. "Marshal," Mercer called out, "you are making a mistake. These people are fugitives. That man is a deserter and a murderer. I have the ledger." "Mercer," the marshal yelled, "I have the boy." Mercer's eyes flicked to Ethan. "Cole," Mercer shouted, "listen to me. You are a practical man. I can make this go away. All of it. The bounty, the army charges. I can give you a fresh start. California, gold, anything you want." Ethan stepped into the light. He stood in the middle of the dusty street. "What is the price?" Ethan asked. Mercer pointed a finger at Nayland. "Give me the girl," Mercer said. "Tell the marshal she lied. Tell him she forced you to write that ledger. You walk away free. Cole, you live." The offer hung in the air. It was spoken like it was reasonable. Just one Apache woman for a life of freedom. Ethan looked at Mercer. Then he looked at Nayland. He saw the woman who had saved him as much as he had saved her. He saw the truth. "I don't trade souls," Ethan said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every man with a gun. "And I don't deal with slavers." Mercer's smile vanished. "Kill them!" he screamed. The street exploded. It was not a glamorous duel. It was a frantic, terrifying storm of lead. Shotguns roared, rifles cracked. Men shouted in pain and confusion. Ethan shoved Nolan behind a water trough and began firing. He saw a man on the roof and dropped him. Splinters of wood stung his face. The marshal's men pushed forward. They breached the front door. Ethan and Nolan followed. The inside of the office was filled with smoke. Mercer was trying to stuff papers into a pot-belly stove. He turned, holding a derringer. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet struck Mercer in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, the little gun clattering across the floor. The room went silent, save for the heavy breathing of the men and the crackle of the burning papers. Ethan walked over to Mercer. He looked down at the man who had caused so much misery. Mercer clutched his bleeding shoulder. Looking up with eyes full of shock, he had never believed the consequences would actually reach him. "It is over," Ethan said. The marshal holstered his gun. He kicked the stove door shut, but it was too late. The primary transfer records were ash. "He is under arrest," the marshal said. They dragged Mercer out. The fight was done. But as the smoke cleared, the cost became visible. One of the marshal's deputies lay dead on the steps. A shopkeeper who had been watching from across the street had been hit by a stray bullet. Mercer was wounded and captured, but his network was vast. The documents were burned. His allies in the capital were still powerful. The hatred that had fueled his operation, the hatred that had killed Sarah, was still alive in the town. Nayland stood on the porch, watching them load Mercer into a wagon. She realized then that justice was not a single moment of victory. It was not a finish line. It was a trail you had to keep walking, even when the ground cut your feet. The marshal walked over to Ethan and Ellen. He looked tired. "I can hold him," the marshal said. "I can get him to trial. But without those papers, it will be a hard fight. And you too?" He looked at the gathering crowd. The townspeople were watching. They didn't look like they had been liberated. They looked angry. "You can't stay here," the marshal said. "The army still has that order. The town still has that hate. If you stay, you become symbols. and symbols get destroyed. He handed Ethan a piece of paper. It was a travel pass, signed by federal authority. Get on a train, the marshal said, or get on a horse, but disappear. Go north. Go where nobody knows the name Silas Mercer. Ethan looked at Nalin. We have Taza, she said. We have the living. They chose to leave. To stay would be to fight a war that could not be won with guns. To leave was to protect Taza, to honor Sarah and the others by keeping the truth alive in the testimony they had already given. They retrieved the roan. He had healed enough to carry a pack, and bought 2 fresh horses with the last of Ethan's money. They rode out before dawn. The town was asleep, or pretending to be. A mile out, on a rise overlooking the valley, they stopped. The sky was turning a pale, bruised purple. The air was cold, but it smelled of sage and new beginnings. Ethan brought his horse alongside Nellin's. He reached out and took her hand. We are running again, he said. No, Nalin said. She squeezed his hand. We are not running. We are riding. She looked at him. The memory of the ravine, of the desperate words she had spoken, hung between them. I will never beg again, she said softly. Ethan looked at her. His thumb brushed the back of her hand. You will never have to, he promised. They leaned toward each other in the dark. It was not a kiss for the gallery. It was a clinging, a desperate confirmation that they were real, that they were together, and that the world had not broken them. Come, Ethan said. He turned his horse north. Nalin whistled to Taza, who was riding a pony beside them. They rode out at dawn across the harsh, bright landscape. They were free for now. They were hunted still. Their future was as uncertain as the wind. But they rode toward it together, carrying a love that had survived everything the world had tried to make of them. Author's note. Thank you for riding along with Ethan and Aylin on this journey through the dust and shadows of the American West. It has been a privilege to share this story of survival, justice, and a love that refused to be broken. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening or reading from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. There are many more stories to tell, many more trails to ride, and I would be honored to have your company by the campfire. Share your thoughts in English. What did you think of the ending? Did justice find its way? Or is the West too wild for clean victories? Until next time, keep your powder dry.